You're all very welcome to this 2021 annual conference of the Quality Customer Service Network. Sadly, as with many events this year, we cannot come together, and traditionally this event was held in the grandeur of Farmley House. However, there is a positive side to it. Hosting the event by WebEx does allow for a much greater number to attend, and given the dramatic growth in numbers participating in the network, that's really valuable. So I think we can see it as a working example of the benefits of digital engagement. I'd especially like to welcome the distinguished panel of guest speakers that we have this morning. We're particularly honoured that Minister Oisin Smith has taken time from a very busy schedule, and I know he's running directly to the dial after this, but he's taken time out to open today's conference, and we look forward to hearing from him in a few minutes. Later, we will hear from Tony Shannon, Head of Digital Services at the Office of the Government Chief Information Office, Angela Denning, who's Chief Executive Officer of the Court Service, Andrew Brownlee, Chief Executive Officer of Solus, Donald Rice of the National Disability Authority, and Eugene Farrelly of the Government Information Service. I should also introduce myself. My name is Brian Boyle. I work in revenue, where among my other responsibilities, I am responsible for customer service policy, and I'm currently chairman of the Quality Customer Service Network. It's a role I only took over earlier this year, but already I've had a chance to see just how powerful this network can be in supporting organisations right across the public service. And with each network event, we've seen greatly increased levels of attendance and engagement. So it's really great to be here to chair this conference, and it's my first time at the annual conference, and to welcome so many colleagues from across the public service. We have a great attendance today. It's actually record-breaking for this network, with over 300 delegates registered to attend, representing almost 100 organisations across a whole diverse range of public service bodies. Particularly want to welcome some of our new members and new member organisations, including local authorities in Tipperary, Cork City, Waterford, Wexford and Mayo, on board Pleanála, Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, the Health Information and Quality Authority, Sligo and Letterkenny ITs, the Irish Coast Guard, the Blood Transfusion Service, the National Disability Authority, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Ireland, and the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement, and the Policing Authority. So it's fantastic to see just how the network is broadening out across the entirety of the public sector. It's nearly going to be easier in the future, I think, to list those few public sector organisations that are not members than to focus on those that are. It's useful to recap briefly on the network. It's been on the go since 2000 and was established initially for customer service representatives from government departments and some civil service organisations. But then in 2019, under the OPS, our Public Service 2020 agenda, the membership was extended out to the wider public service. And we now have more than 130 member organisations from right across that spectrum. And it's a really dynamic group, sharing best practice in customer service, and has been leading the way and driving improvements in the customer experience of our citizens over the last 21 years. I think a really important part of the programme is promoting and implementing the Quality Customer Service Initiative, which sets out those 12 guiding principles for best practice in customer service. And I'm sure you can all recite the 12 principles, so I won't do that for you. Today, you'll hear how a range of organisations are applying those principles, taking advantage of new technologies, while at the same time ensuring customers remain at the centre of everything we do. And the conference is a great opportunity, I think, really to break down silos across the public and civil service and share learning and ideas to help us meet the challenges we face in service delivery. Today we have a theme of digital for all, and this theme began as a concern and then evolved into a celebration. If I look back over even my time with the network throughout the year, the events focused on how best to design new services based around the reality of our customers' needs and experiences. And there was a really strong recurring theme of how digital service delivery was driving very significant advances in efficiency and accessibility, and particularly in terms of our magnificent national response to the COVID crisis. And we'll hear more about that later on. But we did also evince a concern about the potential risks of digital exclusion, whether due to other enablement, digital illiteracy, age, economic circumstances, the risk of people being denied access access to digital services. And this is a concern that we all need to keep to the forefront as we design and develop our service models. And we need to strive to embed universal access and design principles into those models. So later on today, I think the presentations by Andrew Brownlee and Donal Rice are going to be especially informative in that regard. But I think today is also a celebration because as we look at what we've seen in the network, we've seen terrific examples of how digital services can be provided in a manner that is inclusive and promotes access for all. And in that context, again, I'm particularly looking forward to hearing from Angela Denning about how the court service is meeting the needs of its especially diverse range of customers. And I wonder sometimes how the word customer applies, but certainly diverse range of people who rely upon those services. So that's really just to set the scene. So before we begin, I also just want to one or two very brief housekeeping things just to note we're all on WebEx today to let you know your microphone and camera will be muted by default and only the presenters will be enabled, but you do have access to the question and answer chat box, and throughout the day we very much welcome you to put in comments and questions into that and we'll pick them up at the various panel discussions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to the Minister. And Minister, again, we're very honoured to welcome you here and to hear your opening remarks for our conference. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Brian, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming here this morning. Over the next 2 hours, I think this is going to be really valuable because we're going to hear directly from people who have been on the front bringing in electronic government services to the public, and they're going to talk about the successes and the challenges that they faced in doing that. And so I find these kind of sessions really inspiring, but also practically useful. So rather than talking about what the theoretical way is to deliver e-government, they're going to tell you in their area what they did and how it worked. And in many cases, you'll be able to relate to that because, for example, you accessed that service yourself. So we've got a really broad range of different parts of government, agencies, central government, local government, and everything. So I think it's a really worthwhile thing to do. And also, it's just 2 hours, so I think there's it's going to be a good size of something that's going to be digestible. My job is to be responsible for delivering e-government services, making sure we have the policies and support for people who so that everybody can get, if you're a citizen of Ireland, that you can access your government services online in the same way that you would access, for example, your commercial services, or that you do social networking or whatever. You would expect, if the general public expects at this stage, that they will be able to access their rights online. Now, a lot of government services, as you know, are targeted at people who are in need. They are services that provide for when you're not being provided for out of your own resources, when you're out of work or you're sick, and so on. And so a lot of people receiving government services are vulnerable in one way or another. As Brian was saying, perhaps you have a disability, perhaps you're elderly, perhaps you're an immigrant, and for those reasons, you might find it hard to use a computer to access your service. And so we have to design services in a different way from the commercial world. We have to make sure that everybody is included, that nobody is left behind, whoever you are, that you can access your service. And in that regard, we're one of the best countries in the world for delivering electronic services. We're 6th in Europe according to the DESI rankings, or 5th. In fact, we went up 1 ranking this year, but we're not the best. And with that in mind, I've traveled to Estonia and I've met with the Danes, and so those 2 countries are probably at the forefront. And I've asked them specifically, what do you do in your countries to make sure that people don't get left behind? And so I've had a look and seen what are the options and what are the things that are working in practice for countries that are a few years ahead of us. So this morning, we've got a diverse audience. We have public servants joining us from government departments, we've local authorities, we've Garda Síochána here today, the HSE, very important organisation, educational training boards, and so on. So very happy that you're here, and I think that we're going to have a good sharing of ideas. The diversity of public service organisations that are here today tells us about the complexity of the environment in which we operate. We're facing challenges in housing, in climate change and Brexit, and of course COVID-19. And when you have those changes, then you need a rapid, flexible response. And I think that the last 2 years, if it's proven anything, it's shown that the Irish state, that the public sector is capable of a rapid, flexible response when people need it. And there's an increased faith from the public in the ability of the public sector to deliver electronic government services when needed. And I'm very proud of all of you for managing to do that in the last 2 years. Our citizens and communities are at the heart of everything we do. And this conference brings a valuable opportunity to explore how we can ensure that the benefits of digital are realized for all our citizens and communities. Civil and public servants across the country have harnessed the power of digital technology, since the COVID pandemic came in, and there are countless stories of how public servants have adapted and innovated, embracing technology to deliver for the people of Ireland. We're today acknowledging and celebrating customer service excellence across Ireland's public service, and we're going to share some of those stories. So today we can shine a light on a small number of public service initiatives, but I'd like to acknowledge the work of many thousands of committed and professional public servants in Ireland who strive every day to do the best for their citizens. The challenges for public service delivery have never been greater. We are living in an era of rapid change and uncertainty, and while new technologies are fundamentally altering the way that we live and work, these technological advances are also changing expectations of citizens, and there's an appetite for more digitally enabled public services. Ensuring that we provide trusted, responsive services that meet the needs and expectations of all citizens is vital. Digital technology is a powerful tool to help us to meet these expectations, but we need to make sure that we leave no one behind. There are challenges around digital literacy, around service design, and around delivery that we're seeking to address, and you will hear today some of the ways our public service organisations are doing so. We need to make sure we facilitate access for all of our citizens. So as Minister Responsibility for E-Government, with responsibility for e-government, I am keenly aware of the opportunities and challenges of digital. The principles of quality customer service, including equality, access and choice, can guide us, and in my own department, the development of gov.ie embodies these principles. Gov.ie puts the citizen first. The site has been designed around the user with accessibility and universal design at its core. Gov.ie has transformed the way that the Irish government communicates with the public. It puts the citizen first, and with 122 million views in 2020, it is now the trusted one-stop shop for government information and services. I see potential for us to continue to improve public service delivery successfully through the use of digital. The tools and opportunities created by technological advances enable improvements in how we conduct our business, how we engage with our customers, and how we respond to their needs. The importance of customer service has long been recognised in the public service. The Customer Charter initiative was launched in 2002, and the 12 guiding principles of quality customer service date back to 2000. Central to the goal of delivering better outcomes for the public is service delivery. Building on and embedding the innovations and successes in addressing the customer service challenges posed by COVID-19 will be a key consideration as we develop the successor to our public service framework. The level of challenges faced by our public service as a result of COVID-19 has been unprecedented. The response of the public service demonstrates a level of agility, resilience, creativity, and commitment in striving to innovate to continue to meet the emerging needs of our citizens in response to the COVID-19 restrictions. What you're doing is really valued, and I want to thank you for all your work. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge the Quality Customer Service Network and Action Team made up of public service representatives. And I'd like to wish you well in your annual conference, and I look forward to hearing about more customer service successes in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We very much appreciate you sharing the insights from your particular role and your view into this. Again, appreciate your emphasis on the practical aspects of today, which I think is what this is all about. We're not a theoretical group. We are about the provision of concrete services to citizens. I was also struck by your comments about the international perspective. Clearly, we have done a lot that we can be proud of in Ireland, but we're never so brilliant that we can't learn from others. And it's certainly, I think, a takeaway from this possibly to look at for future QCSN events to see if there are best practices in other jurisdictions that we can learn from. I think I was also very struck by the 122 million views on gov.ie, because if ever there's tangible proof of the fact that our citizens have embraced and lean heavily on our digital services, and that in turn raises the bar on all of our responsibilities to provide universally accessible services and, to use your own phrase, to ensure that nobody gets left behind. So very much appreciate that today, Minister, and thank you for joining us. We're now going to move on to the first part of the formal conference, and we're going to hear from Tony Shannon. Tony is Head of Digital Services with the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer. And I think Tony's presentation on the future of digital transformation is a really important part of the context setting. All of our departments, agencies and offices are at some point along a journey of digital transformation. Having a clear picture of what that journey looks like is going to be very powerful in terms of helping us to ensure that the principles of customer service remain embedded as we move along that journey. So over to you, Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here at the Quality Customer Service Network Conference about improving the quality customer services that we provide to the public. My name is Tony Shannon, and I'm Head of Digital Services in the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer, which is based in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. And I'll be talking to you about our work in that office and the work we're doing to try to help lead and direct the future of digital transformation across the public service. I just want to go back to the future, if I can, for a minute, just before we look ahead, to talk about the quote that was made, I think, in the past, where there are decades where nothing happens, and then weeks where decades happen. And I think if you look at the weeks and months that have gone on in the recent times, we have seen that in action. We have seen the massive evolution and indeed bordering on revolution of change across the civil service and the public service that has happened because of COVID. And obviously that has just given us a taste as to what can be done as we look to the future. We're here as a group, I believe, here to look towards the future, to building back a better set of services for all of the customers and the citizens we serve. And that's really about improving the services we provide for everybody, all services for all kinds of people for the benefit of others. And really that's what drives the work we do here, which is trying to build back a better set of services as we move forward. I'm here in this role because I believe that a key to the future of many services, indeed, is digital element, and digital transformation is key to the future of digital, of all public services, and that's why I'm here, and why OGCO is here, and the unit we lead are here. And we're obviously mindful of the size and the scale of the challenge, really, that it lies ahead. The public sector, the civil service, is a large and complex organization. So the size and the scale of the challenge ahead can be daunting at times. And yet, this is best understood as a shared challenge that we're all sharing. And actually, if we look amidst the complexity, we will find patterns. And I'm here today to talk to you about some of the simple patterns that will guide our work. I'm going to go back again, though, to 2016 now, where OGCO was set up in DPER, and essentially the remit we were set out with, which was to deliver better outcomes and better efficiency through innovation and excellence and ICT. And so really what's been happening over the last couple of years has been about building the infrastructure, the building blocks, the foundations of a set of digital services that have only been made capable or available because of the infrastructure that we've built and the capability that we've built up and the governance that surrounds our work. And that's really what's happened in the prelude to what we're doing now. Things like build to share, our digital first agenda, data as enabler, and as I said, improving our governance and capability in the sector. So I think in the last couple of years, as our Minister has already alluded to, we have really seen the benefits of this office and the digital dimension can bring. Gov.ie, as Minister Smith has already mentioned, has seen 120 visits last year. I think I also just mentioned that in the year before that, it had 10 million. So that just goes to show the massive jump in services, and it has really become the go-to place for information. What we'll be talking about in future is not just where we provide information, but more services. the other aspects of our work you may be aware of, or a lot of you will be familiar with, is many of you will have already had a digital COVID certificate, and you'll have seen that in action if you've traveled or gone into indoor hospitality. You'll have seen the certificate and the checker in action. And I'm proud to say that our office was central to Ireland's response to this challenge and the need that was put before us as a digital solution. The CS 2030 Renewal Plan means that that we can't rest on any of that. We have a huge amount of work to do. There's three key tenets to the 10-year framework, and digital first innovation is central to that. So what is called out there is the plan that 90% of applicable digital services will be shifted online. And to do so, we need to kind of co-create those services with the citizens and with the staff to build public trust in those services. But it really kind of gives you a sense as to we're really at the beginning of a digital decade. And indeed, the EU calls out this as a digital decade that's in front of us, that we're now beginning to get stuck into. You will see this reflected, I should say, in our new refreshed public sector ICT strategy. This is a draft of the strategy that is becoming finalized as we speak. And as you can see, of the priority action areas, particularly around delivering or strengthening our digital skills and focusing on leadership, at the front and center there is a user-driven digital experience. So we're really talking about putting the user at the center and driving this change. And that's really what is underpinning the approach. Okay, so just to go back to the future of digital transformation. As I said, one thing we know is it's going to be a major feature of the next years across the public service. That's I think not needed to be debated anymore. And that presents a change challenge to us all. So change obviously has multiple facets, but in simple pattern terms, it has three key ones. It is people, obviously, needing to improve their processes and using a form of tooling or technology to do so. And that's seen at every and all levels and across the board, up and down, left and right. And organizational culture and change is obviously the culture is one of the key things we need to understand as we're moving forward. But it's about people, process, and technology. And that change isn't necessarily about revolution. We're not talking about breaking things up and starting from scratch, but we are more talking about improving and building on the strength that we've already got. So I'm not suggesting that we're at the Formula One level by any means yet, but we certainly have a lot of work to do by building on what we've already got and taking the scooter or the bicycle and improving it to the next generation. That's going to be a team effort. It does require leadership, which is where OGCO comes in, but it's going to be a team effort involving you all and us all to improve both the lives of the people and the life of our planet. So we're going to need to cooperate together to do that. We are under pressure and for time to do these things. So that means we're going to have to work together as maybe never before. Civil servants and citizens, civil and public servants working together to try to make this happen. And I hope what you will see as we move to the future is us about empowering our citizens to take more control over their digital lives in a way that makes their lives better. But it's going to be a team effort, and we're going to try to be as inclusive and conscious of the diverse challenge here as we can as we move forward. The key elements are it's a people challenge, so user-centered design is going to be central. Accessibility is going to need to be mindful as we go, and those are key principles. The process is going to need to move from an older school approach of waterfall, where we do long protracted steps of design and development to testing and wait for big outcome, to a more agile iterative approach where small steps yield small outcomes that build incrementally. We've seen these principles take effect in the digital COVID certificate, where user-centered design and agile development drove out a quick and early version of what a vaccination program solution might work like. And then we were asked to help what an Irish digital certificate might look like. And then because of that work, we were able, within weeks of the call for the need for us to be involved in the European Digital COVID Certificate, to deploy the certificate and the validator. Again, the app for the hospitality was delivered within days because of the agile nature of our work. Another aspect of this was the openness, and the open information and technology approach will be central to the future of digital transformation. That means sharing information, using more open source, open standards, open APIs, open architecture, open data. Openness will help the collaborative team effort we need. And in our own program, where we work in my unit, what we're doing is bringing these principles together, where teams work on projects together and manage the information that's involved in a Kanban process, from to do to in progress to done. And that's how we're getting this work done. So then, as we begin to conclude, we're saying for the next year, our main aim is a seamless set of digital services for the citizen, what we call our Seamless 7, moving from informational services to transactional, supporting core life events such as birth certificates to death certificates to driving licenses. These are in our aim as we move forward. The 7 key components we're bringing together involve digital identity, content management, data collection, case management, digital credentials and a wallet, and digital messaging and analytics. All of those core 7 are key building blocks that we'll be bringing together that will change the game of digital services, we believe. So as we conclude, we're going back to the future. We are basically standing up 7, but there's going to be another maybe 20 or 30 building blocks that we need to stand up beyond those 7. There's an international effort called GovStack that we're involved in, and we're already aware that of that tenet that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So we just need to make that happen. And if we get this right, we're going to see a transformation in this digital decade. So as we're going to finish by saying 2021 is the start of this digital decade. The future means looking after people and planet, user-centered design, agile development, and an open approach to the IT should help us build better public services for all and building back better for all. And I'm going to conclude on that slide. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you very much, Tony, for a fascinating walk through the landscape of change as it's currently happening. I was kind of struck by the influence of Boris Johnson, and I'm not a big fan of Boris, I'll have to say. But build back better is certainly a phrase that we can all usefully adopt. What worried me was when I saw your slides and I saw build back better followed by all the motor vehicles, and I thought you were going to take us into the vroom piece. But I think you stayed on a much more coherent track. I think that concept of co-creation that you gave us is something really important to take out with us, and it's a big challenge, and I think maybe one we'll return to later on in the conversation, because co-creation is a nice concept, but when you embrace a wide diversity of stakeholders, that becomes a real challenge to us all. So that's going to be very interesting. And I'm struck also as well by that move from waterfall to agile. In a former life, I was a developer, but very much in the waterfall culture. And the things that we have done in the last 2 years, whether it's COVID certs, wage subsidy schemes, whatever it is, we would probably still be at the specification phase rather than being a year and a half into live running in a great many instances. And that really is something for us all to consider, is just the pace of change and the powerful things we can do in a very short space of time to deliver for citizens. So again, thanks, Tony. I think it's just such an important part of today's landscape. We're going to move now to hear from our next speaker, Andrew Brownlee. Andrew is the Chief Executive Officer of SOLACE, which is the state agency with responsibility for further education and training. And SOLACE have developed the 10-year strategy for adult literacy under the banner of Adult Literacy for Life. And I think what's, to me, particularly fascinating about this is that while we have talked, and again, another former life as a member of a school board of management, we talked about literacy and numeracy as key life skills, but the concept of digital literacy and the absolutely, I suppose, fundamental need for digital literacy to survive in our society now is a new concept for all of us, but it's great to see it enshrined within that strategy. So really looking forward to hearing Andrew bring us through the strategy. Andrew, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian, and good morning to everyone. If you just bear with me a second, I'll get some slides up. Works. Presume that's okay for everyone, yeah? Yeah, look, really interesting to be here this morning and be part of this conference with its focus on customer service. I mean, adult literacy for life is an ambitious strategy. It covers so much, but I think if you ask me what its most important feature was, it really is about building that cross-government, cross-society, cross-economy approach. And one of the kind of tangible changes that I would really hope that you'll see on the ground as a result of this strategy really is, different, more coordinated kind of approaches by local services. If you present with unmet literacy needs within your community, or even if you don't, just that ability to recognise and support and signpost, and so I think it's all intrinsically linked for that sense of a better, more coordinated public service and customer service for all. So it's really important as well. And I think as we heard, the digital component of that is really important for everyone. I suppose just to kind of give you a sense of why did we have to do this. I think despite a generally well-educated and certainly a technology-driven economy and society in Ireland, there remains a clear challenge around adult basic skills. We know, for example, that 1 in 5 adults struggle with reading and understanding everyday text. We know that almost a quarter have difficulty in using maths in everyday life. And we know that almost 1 in 2 actually lack the basic digital skills. Everyone's surprised by that because they kind of assume, you have a smartphone, you have enough to get by in terms of digital skills, but it's so much more than that. And that was one of the key findings of the strategy, that, digital skills, digital competency transcends into so many other areas. There's an awful lot of attention on literacy and numeracy and indeed digital skills, and there always has been, and there's incredible work, and you'll see such inspirational stories of people who've gone back to get the support and gone on to do great things. But there is a sense that maybe it just isn't joined up enough. And while we now are in the really good position of having really strong literacy and numeracy levels for people of school age, there is evidence from the OECD that once people leave school, there's not much development beyond that. So if you can see that chart just on the right hand side there, you'll see, it's ranked in order of literacy levels, I think at age 15. And you see we do very strong, we perform very strongly on that indicator. But then over time, when you kind of measure literacy levels through that early adulthood kind of life, there's no change. In fact, there's a sign that it actually declines to some extent. So there is an issue. There is an issue about what we do for those that maybe slip through the net at school level and need that support when after they leave school. And that's very much what we're trying to do as part of the strategy. I think the initial plan was for my colleague Roisin Doherty, the Director of Learner Support, to be here today to talk a little bit about this. And it's certainly to Roisin's credit and to our team's credit that the way that we've been able to build that kind of cross-service, cross-government quality customer service approach really was the methodology that we adopted to underpin the strategy. The fact that we, reviewed 400 documents, looked at 10 different international systems, 139 different organisations contributed, 396 individuals. We had a kind of a national sentiment survey. We talked to service users. We had 11 government departments, 8 key agencies involved, and a cross-government committee chaired by the Minister. And I'm sure, as we've seen today, that ministerial endorsement, ministerial sponsorship really is critical to getting some of that difficult stuff, in terms of getting departments, agencies, service providers to move beyond their pure remit and actually think about what the wider impact and the wider benefits of working with others. And I think the methodology to develop the strategy actually played an important role in kind of helping us to embed that kind of cross-organisational approach. As I mentioned, and I think as Bree mentioned at the start, you know, literacy, numeracy, digital inclusion, it impacts so many aspects of our life. It's becoming so increasingly critical as we move into this digitally transformed society. And as I said, you know, it's not been just been about able to kind of read a sign or, you know, use a smartphone. It moves into so many different areas of family life, of health, of being able to get a job and keep a job, of being able to shop online, of being able to manage your finances, you know, I've been able to kind of engage and be an active citizen. So, you know, one of the things we're trying to do with the strategy is redefine what literacy means, and, you know, that it does encompass so many aspects of life as well. And I suppose bringing it down to the level and what we're trying to change. If you look at where people with unmet literacy needs engage at a community level, we have so many services locally that they'll go to. And if we can just harness those resources to support real pathways, to get the support, to get the access to learning that you need, then you really are on a kind of transformative journey in terms of the service that can be offered. I mean, at the moment, you look at, we have 127 primary care centres, 357 ETB, further education and training learning facilities, 983 community education providers, 124 NGO offices, 400 connected digital hubs, 215 citizens information services, 50 local development companies, 330 libraries, 60 money and budgeting advice centres, and 109 family resource centres. And there's many more, but that is just to make the point. These are services on the ground, working with the type of people that need the support. And so if you can give those services, if you can give those people the training, the tools to identify people that might have unmet literacy needs, to be able to deal with those issues personally and sensitively with those people who are there, and then be able to signpost them into the support and services that they require, then, you know, that really is half the battle here. And that's the real reform that we're trying to get to as part of this. Very much part of a wider jigsaw with the Adult Literacy for Life strategy. And what the strategy is really about, it's about a range of commitments and actions in place across 4 pillars that can ensure people understand their needs and where to go to meet them, that they can access all of the learning and support that they need, that the learning and support available can expand to meet this massive challenge. And I think perhaps most importantly, that we empower people and communities to make a real difference to their life. And, you know, you see in the right-hand side of the slide there the overall strategic framework. So it's about understanding, accessing, expanding, and empowering. Underpinning all of that is that kind of cross-government, cross-society, and cross-economy approach. And at the top level and at the national level, you know, as I said, it's really important that the structures are in place to bring all the services together and bring all the structures together. So we're maintaining that kind of cross-government approach with a ministerial chaired implementation group. We're setting up a national programme office. But that's not just a bunch of PMO people. The idea behind that is that you have someone from health seconded into that office. You have someone from community development seconded into that office. You have someone from social welfare seconded into the office. You have someone from the kind of NGO sector to make sure that you have that outreach focus and understanding as part of this office. So a real joined up cross-service, cross-government programme office in the pipeline. And then a network of regional literacy coordinators who will be employed by ETBs, but whose remit will essentially be to go out, talk to the local partners, come up with that integrated service plan and integrated strategy, and make sure that delivers at a regional level on the overall Adult Literacy for Life strategy. So a number of mechanisms to embed that quality customer service approach and that integrated approach at regional level. And obviously the online aspect of this is absolutely critical as well. And one of the things we need to do, like, there is a lot out there, but it's all in different places. It's very scattered, you know, and one of the things we need to do is we need to bring it all together one of the first things that we did was we've established an adult literacy for life.ie portal where you can go to get all of the information, all of the support, all of the advice, hopefully over time, direct learning support to improve your digital skills or to undertake a kind of digital assessment to see where you're at with that. And I think that will serve as your kind of one-stop shop as we move into the future. We have new resources kind of being issued, almost on a monthly basis to help people understand good practice and help empower those local services and be able to identify people with unmet literacy needs. And as I say, give them this, deal with it sensitively, give them the support they need, signpost them to learning, and be able to talk to those other kind of service providers to make sure that it's a tailored approach. Make sure you're not having to say the same thing to 6 or 7 or 8 different service providers at a local level to get the help that you need. And as I said, we have a new army now of kind of dedicated regional literacy coordinators, or hopefully we will have over the next year, that will essentially be out there, be the agents of change, trying to drive that coordinated local service delivery at kind of regional and local level. So look, it's a really exciting time. I know I only have 10 minutes, but I did just want to try and focus on the quality service and the integration aspects of it. But hopefully that gives you a flavour for what we're trying to do. And I really would recommend, if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, to kind of go to Adult Literacy for Life and have a look through the strategy and see what we're trying to do as part of all of this. So thank you very much for your time today, and look forward to the discussion in a while.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Again, a fascinating insight into both your work and the strategy. And I love that concept of a new army, I think was the phrase you used, of people to support that work. I think the statistics that you gave really challenge us all. That concept of 1 in 2 people in our community with unmet digital literacy needs is so central to the work that we're all doing, because we're all moving along, as Tony outlined, the digital transformation journey. And that journey is potentially destined for failure if our citizens don't have the capacity to engage with and to use those services. So probably the most fundamental part of everything we can talk about in some ways is ensuring that that literacy need is met and that we all engage very much in delivery on the strategy. And I think your whole concept of the integrated cross-governmental approach is vitally important to that. So again, very much, I hope that we're talking, as I said at the beginning, about both concern and celebration. I think there's a lot to celebrate in the strategy, and more importantly, its implementation, but equally it just helps us to keep that concern very firmly in our minds. Can I just remind everybody, by the way, that we have the Q&A function. We'll have a brief chat after the next speaker, opportunity for a few questions. So if people have questions, come into the Q&A and pop them in there. It's the way to get yourselves heard, and you're very welcome. You're all quite a quiet audience so far. This isn't meant to be a passive day, it's an interactive day. So let's hear from you. So our next speaker is going to be Donald Rice, and Donald's no stranger to QCNSN. Actually, Donald has spoken to us on several occasions before and shared his insights. Donald is the Senior Standards and Monitoring Officer with the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design at the National Disability Authority, and he's going to give us insights into the EU Web Accessibility Directive. And I suppose it's always useful to think there are 2 reasons why we do things. One is because we are public servants and we're committed to giving a good public service. And the other reason is because we're typically legally obliged to do things. The Web Accessibility Directive is a useful belt and braces to our own individual commitments to good service, because it does place legal obligations on us. And I think, to be fair to Donald and his colleagues at the National Disability Authority, I know in terms of our own web services in revenue, we're currently undergoing an audit from that authority, and we're not perfect, but what we've found is the authority has been very supportive in helping us to get better, and really you can't ask for more than that from an audit intervention. So a hugely valuable service to support all of us in getting it right. Donald, look forward to hearing from you on the directive. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Brian, and I hope my slides are presenting there. And look, just to say, I'm very glad to hear you say that, Brian. In terms of your view of our intervention around the monitoring that we're doing at the moment, because that ultimately is what we're trying to do, which is to provide useful and actionable feedback and monitoring data to public bodies in order to be able to improve the accessibility of their websites and mobile apps. So the time I have with you this morning, folks, is to give you an overview of the Web Accessibility Directive. Any of you who've been attending seminars that we've been running for the past number of weeks will have seen some of this before. But what will be new this morning is I'll give a minute or two to some interim findings as we approach the end of this first monitoring period and what we're finding. As Brian said, this is a legislative obligation now on all public bodies. Came into place in Ireland in the 23rd of September 2020 with the transposition of the EU Web Accessibility Directive. And that directive is quite a prescriptive directive in terms of setting essential requirements for the accessibility of public sector websites and mobile apps. And the essential requirements are they must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So people must be able to perceive them, they must be able to operate them, they must be able to understand them, and they must work across different devices. What is quite different about this directive, and probably different to some other directives in this space, is that it just doesn't set a high-level set of principles. It sets a very prescriptive standard to be used as presumption of conformity, which is essentially EU speak for this is the standard that we must comply with. And that standard is set out in a European document, but essentially it is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So nothing new there in terms of what we've all been over the years striving to design our services against. But for the first time, this is going to be very prescriptively monitored and a feedback given by the National Disability Authority as the national monitoring body under this directive. And it's those implementing decisions that set out in detail what member states have to do around monitoring. They also mention an accessibility statement, which I'll come to in a moment, because I think that's of particular interest to this network. So look, in terms of the scope of the content covered, it's everything really. There are a number of exemptions for content developed before certain dates, but it is everything. It's all websites and mobile apps provided by public bodies. It's the videos on those, and it's the forms, and that end-to-end piece of interaction that Tony was talking to is obviously vital as we move to much more transactional services online in the public sector. So the design of forms so that they're fully accessible to all people across all devices is something that this directive and the monitoring is going to shine a light on. It also involves and within scope are extranets and intranets. So that again is something to take into consideration for any extranets behind an authentication layer that you might provide for stakeholders, but any intranets used by staff as well are also in scope. So an extremely wide a scope, and it's not just the HTML pages, it's everything you publish on your website, on your mobile app, on your intranet or on your extranet. So what do public bodies have to do? Well, as you can gather, we all must ensure that our websites and mobile apps comply with that standard, with conformance rating AA of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This has been referenced in Irish legislation and the NDA's Code of Practice on accessible public services for well over a decade at this stage. But what's different here is now we're going to be monitored against that. Public bodies will provide a detailed accessibility statement, and that detailed accessibility statement must provide and include a feedback mechanism. Again, the directive is very prescriptive about what this thing must include. It must include a statement of compliance. It must include a list of content that the public body knows isn't currently accessible and how someone can request that. It must also say how this accessibility statement was prepared. So it's not sufficient that we just say, well, we think it's accessible or we think it complies. You must have a basis on which to make that statement. Very importantly, you must have a very clear feedback and contact channel for people to provide feedback and make complaints around the accessibility of the website. Accessibility is and has been a statutory obligation, so people must be enabled to make a complaint or provide feedback on that. And the enforcement procedure is how people can complain and have their complaint held and dealt with by the public body. So as I said, monitoring is underway. We're coming to the very first inaugural monitoring period under the directive. In that time, we have reviewed nearly 57 public sector websites and mobile apps. 50 of them have been done in what's called a simplified review. Now, a simplified review doesn't mean it's easy. It means that we only check for a subset of the 50 success criteria under the standard, but we do it across a wide number of pages on the public sector website. In-depth reviews are literally, we go through each page, about 15 pages per website, and go through each of those 50 success criteria and note passes and failures in that regard, and similarly with the mobile. Now, we're at the stage where we're just writing the report, the first report for the Commission, but I want to assure people that our monitoring mechanism is set up not just for reporting to the Commission, it's set up to provide useful and actionable feedback to all public bodies. And look, it may be end of December, middle of January by the time we actually get to give this data out to public bodies, but it's going to be done in a way that public bodies can access and understand and use it, as we say in our centre all the time, so that public bodies aren't just going to get some data that doesn't make sense, that is going to be actionable. So what are some of the findings that we've gotten so far from those in-depth reviews where we go through every page in a painstaking way? We have found on some of the sites that there can be inconsistent or confusing navigation, so that things like breadcrumbs or menus can just look different on different pages, and that can be quite confusing. Poorly designed forms have come up as quite an issue there, including error messages and including the code that's used on forms, such that someone who uses a screen reader is able to fill out a form without any obstacles. There can be often a poor description of images and graphs on web pages, but actually that's less so than I would have thought of at the beginning. Maybe a bit of inconsistency around it. PDFs are a real problem for the public sector. We have published hundreds of thousands of PDFs to our websites at this stage, and very many of them aren't accessible. So that's something we're all going to have to get to grips with going forward. And for the small number of public bodies that we surveyed to ask them, have you ever received a complaint? They've said, no, we've never received a complaint around the accessibility of our website, which doesn't stack up with what we hear from disabled persons organisations who say, yes, we have complained about the accessibility of websites in the past. So there's something for us there to tease out going forward into next year. And no website we found has been fully compliant so far, and we didn't expect it. This is a very prescriptive and detailed technical standard. But many of the issues we found are easy to fix and occur on maybe the header and footer of all pages and can easily be fixed. And we expect the level of compliance to improve significantly. This is just a snapshot of the type of data we're going to be giving to public bodies, particularly under simplified reviews, that will not just give very technical feedback, but also will give snapshot data for the public body to be able to address the most important issues here. This is across all 50 public sector websites that were reviewed under the simplified monitoring method. And you can see there are standout things like color contrast across those websites and PDFs and form design that need to be addressed. So that's the kind of high level data we'll provide in the report to the Commission, but public bodies are going to receive much more information on that. So just some resources that I want to provide you with before I finish. You would previously have heard us, as Brina alluded to, present on this network and my colleagues on our customer communications toolkit. That still serves as a good practice guide for customer communications. But specific to web accessibility, we developed a resource on the Universal Design website called Web Accessibility Techniques, and that provides some very detailed guidance on web accessibility. And we've also provided lists of resources for you to view that are available from other organizations. And just before I finish, just to say, we've been running a series of seminars with the Irish Computer Society. They've been extremely successful. We've had over 700 participants so far at these. And the last of them is happening tomorrow. It might be of interest to many people in this network, which is about accessibility for copywriters, essentially anyone who develops content in an organization that's published to your website, particularly looking at digital formats. So I'll leave it there, Brian. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And I hope that was giving you a little snapshot of the work that we're doing in the National Disability Authority around the directive. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donal. And yeah, there's, I think, really valuable and practical insights for us all into understanding the review process and how to engage with it as well. And I think that's really useful. What strikes me is that having that legal instrument and having a monitoring procedure is also enormously valuable to us, because let's face it, delivering fully accessible services costs money. And sometimes in the battle for funds, corners get cut. So having external monitoring, I think, is just a really important piece of helping all of us who work in customer services to ensure that the understanding of this is embraced fully by our organizations. Ideally, it will be done for commitment reasons, but if not, it's good to know that you're there to tell us when we've gone wrong. Again, very struck by that mismatch of perceptions of dissatisfaction. That's really interesting and something we probably all need to examine our complaint procedures on to understand where that mismatch is coming from. The other thing that, again, the piece about intranet, and again, we did have a lot of discussion about the terms of reference for this group. And one of the things that we concluded after some discussion was that internal customers were equally important as external customers. So I think that idea that accessibility standards have to be embraced at our internal service delivery, hugely important. And thank you for that, Donal. We're a little bit tight on time. We were going to have an initial panel discussion at this point, but I think we will have all speakers for a panel discussion after we've heard the next two presentations. So we might just hold that to that. Although we have one question has come in for yourself, Donal, and just pass it to you now, just whether the courses that you mentioned will be run again in the future.
Yeah, they've been so successful, and there is such I think, a pent-up demand across the public sector to learn more about this, that we're going to continue our partnership with the Irish Computer Society to run information seminar and training courses in future. So certainly, yes.
That's great. That's really useful. Thanks. I think a lot of people following this morning, you'll have a lot of enthusiasm for that. We're going to take a break in a couple of minutes, but before we do that, we also want to conduct a poll of the attendees just to get a sense of your engagement with QCSN and how the QCSN can best support you. So I'm just going to hand over the floor to Grace just to give an outline of that poll and how it's going to work. Thanks, Grace.
Thanks, Brian. Morning, everyone. Grace O'Regan here from DPER's Reform Delivery Office. As Brian was saying, we're going to do a quick poll. We've over 170 participants today, and we just want to get a sense of who's in the room. So Owen is going to upload a poll. There are 4 questions. We're just interested to take a quick snapshot. This is to inform our planning in terms of what the QCSN can focus on over the course of 2022. So there are 4 questions, just run through them very quickly. We're interested to know about your role, each participant's role. We've a number of multi-choice options. It's not one or other. You could tick 1, 2, 3, all, or so the last option is other. So you could be in a customer-facing role, dealing directly with customers. You could be more on the policy side of things. You could be both. You may be management. So if you could click which would be applicable to you. We're interested to know, are you a member of the QCSN in the past? Is this the first event you have joined? We're also interested to get your feedback in terms of how the network can support you. Donal mentioned the communications toolkit that was developed between ourselves, the RDO, and the National Disability Authority. We've also partnered with NAL in developing plain English guidelines. We facilitate these network events. We really want to be of a resource for you, our network members. So if you want to take a couple of moments to fill out the poll. Sorry, if you're not actually, if the multi-choice options to the first question don't apply to you, there is an option just to specify in under question 2 what your role would be. So it takes a minute or 2 to go through it, and we'd invite participants or attendees to fill it out quickly. Thank you.
Good, thanks very much, Grace. And can I just say to people, when you have submitted the poll, we're then going to just take a 5-minute comfort break. It's 11:02 now, so if we can all be back at, let's say, 11:08, I'm going to give you a minute to do the poll, and then we'll take the break. And then we'll hear from Eugene Farrelly at that time. Thank you very much. And we're back. We hope you all managed to get the kettle boiled within the space of 5 minutes. Our next speaker now is Eugene Farrelly, and Eugene is with the Government Information Office at the Department of Taoiseach. And Eugene's going to talk to us about the Government Public Information and Communications response to COVID-19. And I don't think any of us could underestimate the level of challenge that was involved in that, in trying to reach out to every citizen, man, woman and child in the country with advice, guidance, support and access to services during the extraordinarily difficult time we've been through in the last 2 years. And you heard Tony talk about the speed with which new services were delivered and rolled out. And obviously the communications program that underpinned that was absolutely essential to that. So Eugene, we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. I think you may be muted, Eugene.
Sorry, Bree, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you now. Thanks.
Oh, great, thanks. The age-old problem of unmuting oneself. Let me kick off. Thanks very much indeed for the invitation to GIS to speak today. Really appreciate it, and just want to thank you and all the team for. I know a huge amount of work goes into organising these events and conferences, so thanks to all the team for the great work. So I said, my name is Eugene Farrelly. I work in GIS, which is Government Information Service in the Department of the Taoiseach. If you're listening to the news over the weekend, you might think that our job is to stop people going on radio shows and so forth. I'll clarify that a little bit. It's not. It's to coordinate communications. I should say it's never a good weekend when GIS are in the headlines instead of maybe trying to shape the headlines a little bit. So our role is to coordinate communications. As I've said, we comprise the Government Press Office, the Marion Street Content Team, and I hope that all of you are following Marion Street on our various social channels. We coordinate communications, and we also manage cross-government programs or initiatives, and so Brexit, and in this case, COVID. So I'm going to cover the communications aspects of the state response to COVID, hopefully in 10 minutes. There's a lot to it, so I'll do a whistle-stop tour of it. But I want to start off by giving a bit of context around government communications, which has changed quite a lot in the last number of years. And then I'll move into some specifics around COVID and maybe touch on a couple of lessons learned. There are an awful lot of them, so I'll focus on maybe just one or two. In terms of the context, government communicates with citizens every day. And we've heard a lot this morning already about customer service and accessibility and putting the citizen at the center of how we operate as government. Quite often, or always, communications is at that intersection between policy or government, public service, and the public. So we're right at that intersection. You can't, I think, have quality customer service without communications being wrapped up in it. It's an integral part of it. Many of the ways we communicate, we possibly wouldn't even see it ourselves as communication. So from the traditional press conferences by Taoiseach and ministers and officials more often these days, to just how we present ourselves out in the public and how we interact with citizens. In GIS, it's our job to coordinate, as I mentioned, but it's also our job to reform communication. And we started that process in 2017, perhaps not uncontroversially at the time, but those reforms have continued. And the reason I'm making the point, and maybe not to rehash old ground, but when we think about COVID communications, many of the reforms that were instigated and that have been followed through since then would have had to been invented to deal with COVID. And first, I'm going to single out two reforms. The first is how we present ourselves visually as government. And now and again, as we've moved through this response to COVID, we've been accused every so often of mixed messaging. And if you look at the slide that's on the screen at the moment, this to me is the sort of definition of mixed messaging. This is how we presented ourselves pre-2017. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of this individually, but if you think from the citizen's perspective and putting the citizen at the center of how we think about things, we're looking at a whole series of what appears to be unique, different organizations, as opposed to how we are now, which is a clear, identifiable suite of logos, in this case, of government communicating with citizens. If you see this, you know that this is government communicating with you, irrespective of which organization you're communicating from. So if people want to find trusted resources from government, if they see this, they can identify that as such. And particularly in COVID, we've heard so much about trusted sources of information, absolutely vital, particularly lots of misinformation flying around and so forth. That visual identity doesn't just stop at logos. There's a whole suite, a house style, and if you look here, I'm sure you'll all recognize all of these, and it's all clearly identifiable as the government speaking to citizens about COVID. Now, a lot of these things are from different departments. Some are from the campaigns from the HSC, some are campaigns from the Healthy Ireland programme. The National Framework is a campaign led by GIS from the Department of Taoiseach on behalf of all of government. They all are clearly identifiable as being from the same organisation, a trusted source, which is government. Really, really important, and something that's been recognised throughout the world is really important, is having that clearly identifiable source for trusted information. I'm not, particularly in the presence of Tony, and I know the Minister has gone now, I'm not going to claim credit for gov.ie, but gov.ie, ourselves in the OGCO worked very closely from 2017 to develop gov.ie and to move it forward and to make sure all of those departments are up on gov.ie as they pretty much are now. I think I talked about inventing something to deal with COVID. Had we not had gov.ie, we would certainly have had to invent it to deal with COVID. If you go back to mismessaging and that slide with all the different organizations, in terms of how government represented itself online at that time, it was that all those different organizations multiplied by a factor. We did an audit in 2017. We found at least 200 different websites associated with government. And I say at least, it was certainly more than that. So from, again, the perspective of the citizen, if you're trying to find the information that you need, you shouldn't also need to know what department is putting that information out, or what section in what department is putting that information out. You just need to be able to go to government online and find that information. For COVID, every time the Taoiseach stood up to make one of those addresses, either announcing new restrictions or the easing of restrictions, hundreds of thousands of people went online at that moment. So at 6 o'clock, as he began to speak, hundreds of thousands of people went online to find that information, went onto gov.ie to find that information. Can you imagine if they all had to go to the various different websites for each government department to find that information? So in the COVID response, almost every department was affected. The Taoiseach's speech would have needed to be, half it would have needed to be listing URLs for people to find information, whether it's PUP and social welfare, or business supports and revenue, or Department of Enterprise, Trade and Environment, wherever. All the Taoiseach had to do was say, go to gov.ie. We even made it easy and put it on the front of the podium. All our advertising pointed to gov.ie. Without gov.ie, mixed messaging would have been a feature of our response from the start. It would have been pretty much impossible to do without it. These figures have been mentioned earlier by the Minister and Tony, but it's a really stark visual demonstration of how important it was. So that's a number of visitors in 2019 on, well, my left, and then 2020 on the right. So you can see how important and how central a role gov.ie played in the state's response to COVID-19. And that's just a snapshot of the different kinds of information people were looking for. I know this conference is around digital and the importance of digital, but I also want to talk about the more old school, for want of a better word, or analog is how I term it, response, because it's a really important part of the suite of measures needed to respond to something like this. Digital is what we think of when we think of communications these days, but digital still will exclude a large portion of, or a portion of the population. And when you're trying to encourage people to behave in a certain way, or to give them information that's vital, because we're making decisions that really dramatically impact their lives, we have to try and get everybody. We have to try and talk to everybody. So that means more than digital. That means other interventions also. I mentioned headlines at the weekend and GIS making people tell us what they're doing and what they're saying and so forth. There is a serious point to that, and that's just that this idea of coordination, and it's a central role we play in GIS, and it's really about making things clear for citizens. So particularly at the start, COVID affected every single government department and every single government agency, and they all had things they had to communicate, had to get out, and rightly they all wanted to do it, and they were thinking about that. They were thinking about what they had to do and what they had to put out. Our job in GIS is actually to take a step back and to think about the bigger picture and to think about how that would be received by citizens. So what you have is the possibility of a huge amount of information all flying at citizens and media at the same time. And it was really just vital that we streamline that, coordinate it, and just try and simplify it. And that's the rationale behind our role in terms of coordination. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of digital in terms of campaigns and targeting, because it is central, it is vital, and it provides us with so much more opportunity than we had before. And I'll just focus on one specific campaign that highlights that, I think. In terms of coordination, and again, this is sort of preempting a lessons learned, but at the start of the pandemic, we met every morning at 9 o'clock with every single government department and the key public service bodies. Every morning, a representative from every department, in terms of just talking to each other, talking about what we're going to be doing for the day, what we're going to be talking about for the day, making sure there's no surprises, making sure that everybody has the information they need. Again, that was vital. We couldn't have managed the process without that, and that's something that we've maintained. We now do this to cover the entirety of whatever government are doing. So we do this every morning at 9 o'clock with every department to talk about what we're doing for the day. Again, another example of coordination, and another example of the pandemic teaching us maybe best practice and how we should be organizing ourselves. So the analog that I talked about, the more old school way of communicating, for COVID, they were all really important. I'm sure you're all familiar with the media briefings, press conferences. We tried to make them as accessible as possible by ensuring we had sign language interpretation, for example, at all of these. They were all live streamed. These were happening on a daily basis, but we also did things like technical briefings for both media and stakeholders, where we bring them in and talk in a sort of, usually in an off-the-record background way, and we're trying to explain more nuanced, complicated concepts that may be lost in a press conference. So it's a more relaxed, easier venue to talk about more complicated measures and initiatives, and we did that a lot, particularly around business support and things like that. Then there are the more obvious ways that we communicated non-digitally, so through press and radio, big national campaigns. Now I know there's always a lot of talk about the decline in press and in print and in readership. That's true, but you still do exclude a huge amount of readers if you don't do a press campaign, and particularly in the older cohorts. It's really important. Local press, the same. Local press is still read widely, and it's still a really important avenue for reaching people. Even more so is radio. Irish people love the radio. We listen to a huge amount of it. If we're not on the radio, we're missing out a whole cohort of people. So, and it's not just, say, older people. It's across the spectrum, young, old, it doesn't matter. Everyone in Ireland, well, to generalize, listens to the radio. So it's a really important avenue for us. And I'm sure you've all heard our campaigns, whether it's ours or the HSE, over the last 2 years. Again, even more traditional, telephone helplines were really important at the start. Being in a meeting where somebody said, well, maybe we'll take the telephone line off the ad. No, can't do that. You're just going to alienate an awful lot of people. People like to talk to people about these things. I think maybe not so successfully, but the best example of that is the telephone helpline around the digital COVID cert. And the minister is gone, but he'll certainly attest to this. Even though the information is online and available, people pick up the phone and ring. It's really an important support. And again, things like leaflet drops and sectoral engagement, talking to sectors about what they expect, what they want, how we best communicate with them is really important. Digitalgov.ie, I talked about the social aspect. When people think about communications these days, they think a lot about social, and it is extremely important. And social gives us a great opportunity to be flexible, be responsive, and to be immediate. And it gives us something that other medium don't. It allows us to be both broad in our reach, but also very, very targeted. So for broad, for example, we can really quickly put something together on social, put it out. It'll go to the people who follow you, but if we also put some advertising behind that, if we promote that, which has really been important in COVID, it'll get to a really wide audience. I'll just play this as an example, hopefully, briefly, just an example of the kind of things we can pull together very, very quickly on social to get a message out very quickly to a lot of people. So let me try this and see if it works.
The rate of COVID-19 infection is now.
Can we see that?
Act fast if you have symptoms.
There's a voiceover on this, which I'm not sure you'll be able to hear. So very simple messages, very clear, hopefully, and that we can get out to an awful lot of people across all of our platforms, whether that's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, which I'll come back to. So that's the benefit of social. We can also support other departments very, very easily. So this is an example of how we support all our other departments. Again, very importantly, using the unified identity for government, so it's all very clearly identifiable, and that's from the Department of Health. Their Layer Up campaign, so we're able to support and help them amplify that. I mentioned targeting. I also mentioned sectoral engagement. At a certain point, cases among young people were rising, and as we're sitting down trying to think about how are we going to communicate with young people, and there was a lot of angst about we really need to communicate with young people, and we really need to get them to comply with public health. And it was obviously with a lot of preconceptions that, happy to admit, like the preconceptions that young people don't or aren't as worried about COVID, or are really just out there socializing and not paying too much attention to it. And there was a lot of media or social media highlighting of parties in Dame Lane and all that kind of thing. So we started meeting with representatives groups. The HSE chaired every Friday at this time, and we still do it every month. And all of these organizations have been talking to their members and talking to young people. And in fact, quite a lot of our preconceptions were wrong. Young people were worried. They felt they were excluded from a lot of what we were saying and communicating on COVID. They were worried about the impact it was having on their lives. They were worried about the disease itself. And they were stressing the need to be spoken to as equals and not to be condescended to. And that led to us realizing that we needed peer-to-peer communications. So we need to create communications, not us talking down to young people, but communications created by young people talking to young people. And that led us to the Antiviral Campaign, which is probably the most successful campaign we ran. It was all on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. I saw none of it because I'm not on any of those things, which was a sign of the success of the campaign, I think. And we had to do a lot of explaining around the building and in government buildings that, yes, we were doing something on young people. You're not seeing it because you're not supposed to see it because you're not a young person. So very successful campaign. And I'll just share some stats around that. I don't like to make too much of things like some impressions and reach because they're perhaps not the most insightful of figures. The engagement figure certainly is. And the engagement rate for antiviral was 36%. Might not sound massive, but the industry standard for engagement on Facebook and Instagram is between 3 and 5%. So 36% was enormous. It's certainly a company that we worked with to put this together. We're staggered by it, and it just showed how engaged young people were actually in this pandemic, and it really challenged and emphasized the importance of challenging our preconceptions when it comes to communicating with people. And again, it showed the benefits of digital. So lessons learned, I mentioned at the start, I could spend the whole 20 minutes talking or more talking about this, a whole session talking about this. I've gone for an approach, general portrays the American general, differentiates between lessons identified and lessons learned. And a lesson is only learned if it's incorporated into your processes and into how you work. And I think I'm focusing on research and insight because we certainly have learned of the importance of that, and we're incorporating that more and more into how we work. 3 examples of this: polling. So the Department of Health run polling every week through a Amórach, and that constantly and consistently challenges our perceptions. So at various times, quite a lot throughout the pandemic, we're assuming that people are fed up with restrictions and will not welcome anymore. And in fact, polling, particularly when cases get bad, show that the public are always ahead of that. That as things get bad, the public start actually looking for restrictions or are more receptive to restrictions. They may be fed up, but they are still realizing the importance of restrictions. For campaigns, pre-testing for campaigns was really, really important. And people are so tuned into what you're saying and are so affected by this. They're very, very sensitive to how you communicate. So pre-testing can really correct you if you're on the way to really offending a group of people, or certainly of switching their interest off. Same for stakeholder engagement and sectoral engagement, which I spoke about with Antiviral. And finally, one that we're really interested in, the Department of Taoiseach, we partnered with the ESRI to conduct what's called a social activity measure. It's a piece of behavioural research, and throughout the pandemic, our behaviour is one of our most important defences against COVID-19. But we weren't measuring how people are behaving. So SAM measures how people are behaving and generates insights off the back of that. Just to focus on one, we always hear about fatigue and fatigue with restrictions, and that certainly was found to exist. But what SAM found was that it doesn't drive behaviour. So people may be fed up, but that's not driving their behaviour. They're still complying with public health, even though they're fed up. And that was just an important learning to take on board. Another is coherence of restrictions, and the more incoherent people find restrictions, the less likely they are to comply with public health advice. So this graph is a demonstration of coherence of restrictions throughout the pandemic, right up to date. And the part of this graph I'm most interested in is from the very early March until June. And that's the sort of the flattest part of this, the bit slightly increases. And at that stage, we had a very clear program of easing restrictions very, very slowly and communicating every week on what was being eased and what was still in place. And the coherence really maintained a really strong, stable level of coherence through that period. And it was really a good indication to us that what we were doing in terms of communications was working, was going along the right track. It's been up and down since then, and we're always striving to get that better, but it was just a really good demonstration of the benefits of this kind of research to us. And then the final lesson is alignment of policy and comms. And if you invite any communicator to a conference, you'll hear them talk about this, the importance of communications being wrapped up in policy formation. This quote from Government Communications Service that communication is one of the 4 main levers for government alongside legislation, regulation and taxation, instead of being something to be done at the end of each of those. And COVID really demonstrates that, the importance of having communications wrapped up in policy formation in order to deliver the best outcome for citizens. So that's me, and they're the areas I've covered, and I'm very happy to take questions. If you do want to get in touch afterwards, these are the addresses, and also please, if you're not already, do follow Marion Street across all of our social platforms. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Eugene, and very interesting insights into a difficult time. And I suppose the impact of communications was struck me in the way that most of the citizens might never have heard of. Civil servants, Liz Canavan, Tony Holohan, people like that suddenly became household names, and how all of that was managed was magnificent. A couple of things that struck me from your presentation: that idea that communications is just a critical element of all service delivery, and that's something I think for us all to take away from this. Interestingly as well, that in our rush to embrace the power of digital, not to lose sight of the analog, depending on the groups that we want to talk to. And then at the opposite spectrum from the analog, of course, those insights into the power of social, that again, we're all, I think, sort of experimenting with in different ways, and the behavioral insights coming from that are really important to us. And finally, I think the thing that really took from your presentation was that concept of the citizen perspective. And I think, we are all very conscious of our identities as revenue or DSP or DETI or deeper or whatever acronym we have to describe ourselves. As far as Joe Citizen is concerned, we're all the government, and we're either delivering a good service as the government or we're delivering a bad service as the government. And I include within that the local authorities, all of the agencies. So it is really important that we can see it from that perspective. So thanks for that, Eugene. Again, just to remind everybody that the chat line is open. There are some questions already in there. Before we open it to the panel, we're going to hear from our final and speaker this morning, and a really interesting presentation I'm looking forward to, from Angela Denning. Angela is CEO of the Court Service, and the Court Service has been going through a very extensive renewal and reform process. And when you talk about customer service, the Court Service is such a diverse range of customers, everything from persons involved in basic issues such as the bereavement and the transition of property, right through to the legal profession, through people who are involved in commercial disputes, to people who are criminal suspects. So it's probably one of the most diverse customer bases you could imagine. So to design services that put the customer at the heart is a significant challenge. And I look forward to hearing Angela's insights into that. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks a million, Brian, and thanks very much for inviting me to speak today and allowing me to share, I suppose, our journey. And I know that sounds very management speak, but it is a journey about putting the user at the centre of our customer service journey. And actually, in the introduction earlier, Brian, you asked about that question about, you know, the customer and the courts. I'm very conscious. My parents have a pub, and I'm very conscious. I treat everybody as a customer. It's part of my DNA, I suppose, at this stage. But I'm really, really conscious that the majority of people that interact with the court service don't want to come to court. People come to court as a last resort, and it's not as if they come in to get a service. We provide facilities for people to do their business and to move on with their lives in a lot of respects. So it is, we're in a very unusual position, and I suppose I'll begin by providing context. Owen is going to help me with the slides today because my battery is running low here on my iPad and I forgot to bring my charger. There you go. So the next slide, please, there, Owen. Just to give you a bit of context, we're responsible for the management and the administration of the courts in Ireland, with a very unique role in supporting the third branch of government. And our work very much reflects what's going on in society on any given day. We run an operation the size of a small town. I've said this before, and the figures speak for themselves. So about 15,500 probate applications every year. A large proportion of those now are done by people without the use of a solicitor, so personal applications for probate. 13,200 supervision orders and care orders for vulnerable children last year. We manage nearly 2 billion of investments for 2,500 wards of court. They're the most vulnerable people in society, people that the courts have deemed can't manage their own affairs. The district court alone dealt with 382,000 incoming offences, 415,992 criminal matters in total. And our service is provided by about 1,100 staff operating nationwide in 33 court offices, with 19 county registrars, 176 judges. And we work alongside, and I do say alongside, about 20,500 solicitors and 2,300 barristers. Our spend last year was about 155 million, which includes 32 million of fee income. We have 103 venues nationwide, some of them very nice, some of them not so nice, and they're dispersed right across the country and cater for communities as small as 1,200 out in Kilronan and the Aran Islands, and 1.37 million in the Dublin Metropolitan District. So the next slide there, please. We recently embarked on an ambitious 10-year modernisation programme, which aims to improve access to justice in a modern digital Ireland. And we're currently in what the management speak people call the transition phase. So it's about putting the building blocks in place, building the foundations for modernisation. So capability, capacity, we've increased our IT unit, we've established modern technology platforms, developed some organisational strategies and IT frameworks, and piloting new user-centric ways of working. So our ambition is to create a future court system that's just user-centric, simplified and timely. Now, that all sounds great. It's about getting it done, I suppose, is the real challenge. But we are consulting more and involving our customers more to get a better understanding of their journey to let us design our services better into the future. We interact with a diverse and complex range of users across a range of services and channels. The current experience of those users is one that's often marked by frustration, the significant cost of court cases, waiting times, the duration of procedures, delays in accessing required information, the need to travel to access and deliver hard copy documents. That was one of the biggest barriers for us during COVID, our reliance on paper. And this experience is partly due to the system that's kind of evolved over time around the needs of the system and as necessity required rather than around the needs of the users. And I suppose it's the first time that we're seeking to assist all users, including the people whose cases they are rather than their legal advisors, by addressing the barriers and breaking cycles of unmet justice needs. We know that the inability to access justice can be a result of, but a cause of disadvantage and poverty as well. So if you think of it, if you come into contact with the court system because, for example, you're involved in low-level crime or something like that, you're far more likely to come into contact with the court system in relation to other things as well, housing, educational needs. It's a vicious cycle. We know we need to rethink the traditional approaches to delivering services by making the services more personal to the individual and their situation. And choice is key. I really see digital as an enabler in relation to this. And I was very taken by the earlier speakers because we can't close down. We can't say we're moving entirely to digital. We're going to close certain methods of delivering services. We have to be able to cater for my mother who can barely use a remote control of the television, never mind a mobile phone. But we also have to be able to cater for the 15-year-old defendant in the childcare courts who doesn't, who's never gone to the post office and posted a letter. So it's that broad spectrum of users. And we want to deliver services with a focus on accessibility, making the processes and procedures simple, easy to follow, and integrated with our justice partners as well to make sure that we've got collaborative working. So integrated with the guards, the prisons, probation services, and so on. The next slide there, please, Owen. And you'll be glad to know modernisation isn't all about IT and digitalisation. It's primarily about people. And our aim is to take a very user-centred approach to everything we do. And we started to kind of show this already. We have the virtual tour there, the 360 tour, one of our buildings. We've decided, when we went out and spoke to NGOs, they said people are really worried before they come to court. They actually don't know where they're going. They don't know what the courtroom looks like. Most people, thankfully, only go to court once in their lives. They don't know what the courtroom looks like, who stands where. They worry about where they should sit, what they should wear, that type of thing. So what we've done is a virtual tour of one of our buildings, which we're about to launch and to expand to other buildings, to allow users to take a tour of the building and the courtroom before they go in to know what to expect. And one of our judges has done a little bit saying, this is what I do when I'm in the court and this is where I sit, and I'll hear from you and I'll hear from the other side, and then I'll make my decision. We've had a registrar explain what they do, the stenographer explain what they do, just to make it easier for people who come into court. We have a family court pilot underway in Limerick at the moment, and we've introduced child action spaces. You'll see the toys on the wall there in that middle picture in family law offices around the country using the Public Service Innovation Fund funding that we got last year. And that's purely because we recognise that many people have to bring children to court with them if they're involved in family law cases. And it's very difficult to talk to somebody at a court counter if your child is crying in the background or bored or whatever. So by putting toys on the wall, it just took the temperature down. We've centralised our legal aid panel. Solicitors around the country used to have to lodge their tax clearance certificate with every county, with the offices in every county in the country, get on the legal aid panel for each county. So we've centralised that. That's something very, very simple. Didn't require any legislative changes or anything else. It's just customer service. In addition, put a new online appointment system in place in some of our offices. We're piloting in Dublin and Limerick so that people know what time they're going to be seen at a public counter and can better manage their time. And if you think of it, again, if you're a single parent, you want to know, how long am I going to be there? What time do I pick up the kids at? Before you came in, you joined a queue and you could have been in the queue for 2 hours waiting to be seen at a counter. Now you get a time slot, you get your 10 minutes, you lodge your paperwork in advance, or you can lodge some of it in advance so that we know what application is coming in as well. And it's just made for better customer service. One of our functions is to provide information on the court system And courts.ie has about 3 million visits a year. So we've worked at redeveloping that over the past 18 months. Now we've an awful lot more work to do, and we're subject to an audit at the moment, an accessibility audit. So let's see how we get on with that. But what we want to do is embed a practice of plain language across our website content. We want to ensure that information is accessible to our customers in a language not that we understand, that they understand. There's an awful lot of legalese. Now, some legal words have specific meanings and they've been the subject of case law and everything else. But the rest of the language should be very understandable and in plain English so that an ordinary member of the public can understand it. I believe it's particularly important because when the Government Information Service went out to do the work in advance of setting up gov.ie, they found that the average reading age of an adult in Ireland is 9 and that 1 in 6 Irish adults can't read a bus timetable. So how can we expect to explain legal documents to people if we don't use very plain English? We know that the younger generations prefer video to find out information. So YouTubing as a subject is more popular than Googling it, or YouTubing a subject is far more popular. As a result, we're increasing our use of video and infographics on our website. One of the benefits of this is that users with language and literacy barriers can understand a video where they may not understand documents or forms. We hope how we communicate has changed. We know that 96% of people carry a mobile phone and some prefer to use social media. So we've expanded our use of social media and Twitter. We started with, can you remember Storm Lorenzo 2 years ago? We're in the middle of Storm Barra. We started using Twitter during Storm Lorenzo and it worked really, really well to let people know what offices were closing, what offices were opening. So during the pandemic, we expanded our use of Twitter. Now, Eugene, something he said there really resonated with me. At the start of Twitter, we were kind of drafting using our traditional, more, what shall I say, wordy messages. And one of our snarky customers said on Twitter, oh, another government announcement, there'll be another 6,000 word announcement from the court service. So we took the message and we streamlined our communication. And I do believe that it worked. And certainly we've had feedback from regular users that they found our communications improved throughout the pandemic. And then with Storm Barra, we were able to just put announcements up on Twitter as offices, as the rolling red moved around the country, we were closing offices. We used Twitter to let people know. So I hope that worked. The next slide there, please, Owen. I believe, I kind of go back to Marks and Spencer's. They said at one stage they nearly closed because they didn't listen to their frontline staff, the staff on the tills, who said the customers really love those trousers, but they don't like them in the black and white check. They prefer them in navy. They didn't listen to their staff, and it had a huge impact on the business. I believe our frontline staff are the key to us delivering improve customer service. They're always looking at how we can improve our services. So empowering my staff to innovate is at the heart of how we will improve our customer service offering. And it's at the heart of our innovation strategy. Now, we launched that earlier this year. In 2021, we focused on developing a pathway so that staff can get their good ideas through to being implemented without people like me at the top of the food chain who don't know what they're doing, interfering to such an extent that the good idea gets diluted into something that's not such a good idea anymore. One thing we really put a lot of effort into was collaborating with our justice partners. And one of the early results of that collaboration was getting funding from the Public Service Innovation Fund again for the Jam Card initiative. And if you move on to the next slide there, please. We've become a jam-friendly organisation. What does that mean? A jam card allows people with a learning difficulty or communication barrier to ask for an extra minute, a bit of patience from the person dealing with them at the public counter when they come to a counter or when they come into a court office. And it allows, they just show the card, they don't need to say anything, and we all understand because we've all undergone the training. It was a collaborative initiative along with the Prison Service, the Dublin Coroner's Court, and the aim is to provide staff with e-learning training to support the Jam Card initiative and to understand better the needs of customers. So it's about us going on in the training. It only took 15 minutes, but that we understand what somebody who shows you that card actually needs. Our innovation team got involved and they kind of spread the word around the organisation. And within 3 weeks, we had over 75% of the organisation trained up. It's been something that's been really, really significant and really important for us because we put our heads into the space of the person coming into a court office who has that difficulty, who just needs a little extra time. You know, they have autism, bright lights or extra noise is a problem for them. They can just, we say to them, do you want me to turn down the lights, or do you want to move, you know, move to somewhere that's a little quieter in order to deal with their business? And it's really, really helped. But it sent out a clear message to our customers that we're committed to delivering user-centered services, which is something really, really important. On the next slide, please, then, Owen, we play an integral part in, you know, people think family courts can be very adversarial, but it can also be very healing. This is a way for a family to move on together if they come to the right outcome. And it's not just for families, for victims of crime, for juveniles involved in the criminal justice system. So all court users should experience kind of a sense of safety, personal agency and connectedness when they come in to engage with the courts. The court environment, practice and policies impact on all of our users. And with this in mind, we're now rolling out trauma-informed practice as a way for people to deliver service and to understand how life events can impact on how people behave when they come to a public centre and interact with our services. It's all about understanding the impact of trauma on the brain and how that facilitates kind of challenging, like it can create challenging behaviour. What you've been through in your past can create challenging behaviour as a kind of a survival strategy. And it means that when we understand that, we can enhance the service and enhance our ability to engage with individuals in a more empathetic manner. We started this because this came from the ground. Staff at the front line said this could be something really, really useful and could help everybody. The benefits identified, those who've already participated in the pilot training, are numerous. They said there's a much better understanding of what people are going through when they come to a court office. It supported staff members in approaching court users in a kind of an informed way, given more positive outcomes at public counters, both for court users, but also for our staff. Reduce stress for people, again, both for the customer and for the staff. And it's also given a better overall experience for court users. The training's been rolled out to everybody across the organisation, and the initial courses are all oversubscribed. Anybody who's gone through it has found it really, really beneficial. On the next slide then, please, Owen. Over the last 18 months, our job has been to protect the health and well-being of employees, judges, staff, but also keeping the doors open at the courts. And it's been quite difficult because courts, I say sometimes it's like running a chain of pubs. It's the only way to describe it. The door's open, you don't know who's coming in, you don't know how many on a particular day. And we've had to manage all of that. And we've kind of used technology and innovation to try to deal with some of that. One was a very digital solution for COVID compliance checks. We put an app on our staff's phones so that they could do the compliance checks walking around a building, but that our health and safety team got real-time information back to allow managers to kind of respond or put interventions in place as we did them. And of course, then we had the introduction of remote courts, which has dramatically changed how we've done our work. In 2020, we facilitated over 2,400 courts. Now, we got this up and running within a couple of weeks of the pandemic starting. The platform is free to use. I was really conscious that court users, so members of the public who have to come to court as a witness or something, needed to be able to use this. So the platform we use, it's not very fancy, it's not as good as Zoom, but it is accessible from any kind of a mobile phone or device, and that's been really, really important. We now have also, you know, looking at the way we've kind of moved through this, we now have a group of users who've been using remote courts for over a year and a half, and they've got a better understanding of what they might want for the future. So what we have at the moment is probably the worst it's ever going to be. It will improve, but it means that we now can go out and ask an informed group of people what they want for the future. And that's really, really important to us. We've seen an increase for demand from certain types of witnesses to use remote courts, eliminating travel time, eliminating time hanging around court waiting to give evidence. We've seen a demand to continue straightforward administrative work remotely. It's also removed some of the unseen barriers to justice. Again, if you're somebody in poverty, the cost of childcare, time off work, car parking, travel expenses, wearing appropriate clothing, have all been eliminated by the use of remote courts. We've seen an increased participation in certain types of proceedings like insolvency, where some participants can just dial in rather than having to close their business for a half day to come to court. And we've got some really positive feedback from people, victim support, who at an Oireachtas committee recently said that the measures taken in the courts during the pandemic, such as staggering court lists rather than calling everybody for 10:30 in the morning, meant less waiting around time for victims, less crowded court spaces, and the option to either give their evidence remotely or to follow proceedings remotely. They've all helped victims, and that was something we hadn't considered before we started. We've also taken evidence from prisons during the pandemic. So far this year, 18,500 Irish Prison Service remote appearances. It's been particularly useful at the moment. There are outbreaks in some prisons at the moment, and it's had significant benefits right across the system, not just in terms of cost, but the movement of prisoners has a huge impact on prison life. You know, some might have to be moved from Cork prison to a prison in Dublin the night before their prison appearance. It allows prisoners to participate better in training and education, less disruption in the routine. Prisoners survive on routine, so less disruption in their routine. And like, they're all unseen benefits of us kind of going, how do we deliver our services in a different way? Much of what's been achieved over the last 18 months, we planned for anyway. We've done some of these things under the modernisation programme. However, we'd have done in years 6, 8 or 10 of the programme rather than in year 1. The constraints, you know, the pandemic imposed constraints, there's no doubt about that, but it also allowed our staff and judges and court users to kind of show creativity and determination to deliver that I couldn't have expected. We're now challenged to ensure that we take advantage of what we experienced during the pandemic, and that's going to make for a really interesting time over the next couple of years to fulfill that vision 2030. We've had some radical changes in a short period of time that were necessary in order to avoid the collapse of the justice system. We wouldn't have chosen, but in hindsight, the pandemic was probably the disruption that we needed as a legal system, rather than one we'd have chosen at this time. But ultimately, what we want to do is benefit our service users, and it's dependent on them coming on this kind of modernisation journey. I hate that word, but there's no other word to use really, over the next few years to improve our customer service. And that's all about us getting our communication and engagement right from the outset, and going out and speaking to people and saying, how do you want the service to be delivered to you, rather than me sitting here saying this is how I'm going to deliver it. So that's us for the future, and that's the end of that for today for me.
Thank you very much, Angela. Some fascinating insights, and it's certainly the first time I've ever heard the court service compared to a chain of pubs. And certainly, if we have one thing in common with revenue, certainly as well, it is the unwilling customer that we still have to treat with the respect that is due to a customer. I was very struck by your reference to the idea of lack of access becoming a cause of later outcomes in terms of poverty, exclusion, criminality, and again, a vital lesson for us all in that, in terms of the fact that access to services is not a trivial matter, and it's enormously important in terms of the life of our citizens. Also struck by that idea of responding to the user's medium of choice, particularly the moving to video, listening to your staff, and then the whole JAM initiative, which because my sense of being in court and the limited occasions I have is always of a lot of busy people rushing from place to place, a dreadfully frightening environment to somebody with learning difficulties or engagement difficulties of any kind. So, and again, it's something I think maybe later on we might see how JAM works for the rest of the public sector. So thanks very much for that, Angela. Colleagues, I'm just conscious that we're a bit tight on time, and we do want to open things up to the panel. There are a number of questions coming in. I'll just remind you that the session is being recorded, so if anybody has to run, I'm going to ask our panelists, if possible, they could stay with us a little bit beyond 12. Now, I know, Tony, you have to leave us, so I'm going to sort of open up with yourself, and just a quick question for you around that interesting concept of co-creation. Again, I think we're familiar with the concept when it comes to, say, a public service working with software providers and so on, but co-creation with wider sections of the citizen base, what kind of tools are available to help us do that?
Well, I think that there's a large body of knowledge in this area from the rest of the software industry in terms of digital tools for user-centered design. In the past, I know that my colleagues who were setting up gov.e did actually pop into offices and brought in prototypes with them to show citizens who were in those offices waiting for their feedback, there and then by just sitting with them. The evidence is that you don't need to have hundreds of people feeding back on a digital service to provide, the top elements of feedback. If you get about a dozen people, you'll get good feedback. If you get a diverse enough group. There are now online tools that make it quite easy to do customer feedback and user-centered design online. So for instance, we use a tool called Figma, which is a user-centered design tool which allows you to develop a prototype and share it as a web link and comment anywhere you like on the prototype to say, this doesn't make sense to me, I don't understand that. There are tools like that, and then there are other more sophisticated tools that allow you, again, with a small number of users, and again, this can be done remotely, to track their eye movements and so on, to kind of see whether they're going to getting lost or making sense of the application. So there are quite a lot of tools from the industry now that allow a small number of people to provide very valuable feedback to the tools, to the services we're designing. We just need to begin to use those.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, that's really interesting and really valuable, I think, because it sounds almost airy-fairy when we talk about engaging the citizenry, but I think it's really good to know that there are practical tools that we can use, and we can use them in a very efficient way. And that idea of keeping the base relatively small, providing you get the right diversity, and obviously that's a challenge, and it's different for each one of us. Listen, Tony, I do know that you have to run, so I just want to thank you again for your participation today, and I hope the weather has calmed in the west where you are, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We have a question about, and was based on some of Eugene's presentation about, the question is really whether the government are looking at similar social media approaches to the youth, in particular on the subject of climate change. A lot of work done in this area that potentially younger people are not aware of, and a lot to be done on it. A lot of work to be done on climate change, and it might be good to highlight both the work that's being done and opportunities for people to change. I know there's the whole of government effort around climate change, so maybe I might just pass that question to yourself, Eugene. Are we heading down the TikTok route, or are we already there?
Yeah, there is a lot of work to be done, I think, and we've been looking at this recently, and just looking at the extent of the challenge that it presents, because similar to COVID, climate change is enormous in terms of communicating scale of it. And if we were to take one lesson from COVID, I think it is that engagement with sectors like the youth, for example. It's going to be vitally important. I think maybe one advantage that we'll have in climate change over COVID perhaps is, I think younger people tend to be more engaged on climate action and more interested. So I think that will help, but we absolutely have to engage with them where they are. And that means on those channels. It means not just being present on those channels, but being present in a way that doesn't condescend to them. So it means involving young people, and that idea of co-creation is really important. And that's what we did with Antiviral. It's involving young people in the creation of the campaigns. And that's certainly something that we'd look to take forward into climate action. But a lot of work to do on it, and particularly when we're talking about behaviour change and getting that across to citizens. A lot of general work, but also specific work like engaging with young people.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, and it very much reflects even Angela's comments as well about sort of meeting the users on their own medium. And obviously there's a huge amount of work to be done to break down a certain cynicism between some sectors of society. And I know my own children would have a dark view about old people like me and the rest of the government and our capacity to deal with a challenge like climate change. So obviously that idea of finding the right medium and voice, and I think your point about the co-creation and the involvement is a really important piece within that. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Andrew. And again, it was really interesting to look at some of the statistics, Andrew, that you had around the sort of digital literacy levels across jurisdictions, and there were a couple of leaders. We were sort of in an okay place, which was kind of worrying, given that the level of digital illiteracy we faced. But obviously there were another number of other jurisdictions. I think Japan in particular stood out as well above us. And I'm just wondering, are there features of those jurisdictions that we need to pick up and emulate?
So Green Andrews had to step out, so he's not here to answer the question.
I'm talking to myself at this point. This is again one of the challenges of a digital conversation. Is he coming back, Grace, or?
I don't think so. No.
Okay, not to worry.
There's a couple of questions. Sorry, just to mention, there's also a couple of questions on the Q&A session. Just a couple of people posted there just to bring to your attention.
Right. Oh yes, the Q&A sits separately to the chat. That's great. Let's see if I can find them now. Yes, an interesting question that probably could be addressed to Donal and/or to Eugene as to whether gov.ie has been audited by the NDA and how well it's standing up. I don't know. There's either Donal or Eugene want to comment on that.
I'm not sure specifically, but I do know that the guys in OGTO, it's top of their agenda, and I know they work very closely with all those organizations. So I don't know if it's been audited. I'm sure they're working closely with them though.
Yeah, and certainly it's obviously your reach has been very positive. I mean, I think certainly what Donal would have reflected was that none of us are perfect, and there's certainly a journey to go. To use Angela's phrase. I don't know. Is Donal still with us?
No, Donal had to leave as well.
Not to worry. Okay,
Yeah.
I think we're disappearing rapidly. Another question there from Owen Hicks, and two questions really around the whole idea of digital security. Whether panelists would be concerned about the use of private email addresses for communication, and indeed whether we should be going in the direction of providing state emails to citizens just for dedicated to public sector engagement. Maybe Angela, you might have thoughts on that, given the sensitivity of quite a lot of your customer base.
Yeah, I can see the two sides of it. I can see that it would be really useful. I would love it if we had an email address for every citizen in the country. We could serve documents using that email address. And similarly, we could use that then when people would dial into calls or would interact with us. We do have the MyGov ID, and a large proportion of the country have that, but it's how we use it. And people are very concerned. In a former life up in Deeper, one of my jobs was dealing with the data sharing and governance legislation. And I'm now a member of the Public Service Data Governance Board. And people do have a concern about government having access to their data. And I think that's a question of trust. And it's a question of government building trust with citizens and using data well. And once we do that, I think citizens will then trust us. But there is that challenge. And, you know, certainly we saw it at the outset when we introduced remote courts. People were very, you know, what email address are you going to use and all this kind of thing. And then after a while, we said, look, we don't care what email address you use to dial in. A court is open to the public, so anybody can dial in. And it built that trust, and it's made things easier. And we haven't had all of the catastrophic things that we thought might happen, you know, people coming into court cases and all that sort of thing. We haven't had any of that. So, but it's all about trust. And I can see absolutely that if we had an email address for every citizen in the country, it wouldn't just be a benefit to the citizens, it would be a benefit to the public services trying to deliver services. But there is that balance to be struck. And until such time as our citizens, a former Secretary General used to say to me, who shall remain nameless, look at them, they're there giving out about GDPR, the public services card and everything else, and yet they'll give all their data to Facebook or to Instagram or whatever. But it's about trust. And if we get the trust right, then everything else will flow from that. And I think that's what's important.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think I couldn't agree with you more. That concept of trust is absolutely central to it. I mean, on the practical level, I suppose I struggle with having only 3 or 4 email addresses and actually keeping track of the passwords and access and all the rest of it to it. So there are practical issues in here, but certainly having mechanisms that allow citizens to communicate with us in a way that they're comfortable with and feel confident that it's trustworthy. There's an interesting related question here from Michelle Allegri about plans or guidance to be shared across public service functions re e-signatures or stamps and moving away from paper-based documents. And again, even just to pick up from, certainly revenue has moved down the road quite a while ago of e-signatures for significant, and COVID accelerated that. I know a lot of other government departments are, and I know we are looking at legislative change to enable the one that's created for revenue to be used for other departments, in particular social protection, because there's a lot of interaction. It's an interesting concept, though, as to it's perhaps related to the email question, whether we should have a single e-signature or e-identifier. And again, a piece now, again, unfortunately, Tony has had to leave us because I would be really interested to get the OGCIO perspective on that concept of a single universal e-identifier. I don't know if anybody else on the panel wants to comment on that.
Certainly during the, we have new legislation allowing for e-signatures for court documents, but individual departments are having to move individual pieces of legislation at the moment in order to provide for that. I'm sure it's there in one of the revenue pieces of legislation over the years to allow revenue to do that. And again, it's something that I think as we become more joined up, so for example, if we can use an e-signature in the courts, you should also be able to use your e-signature when you're dealing with the Office of the DPP or Garda Síochána or whoever else across the justice sector. And I think that's something that will be a challenge into the future, and it's probably something that we'll need to address at a higher scale sometime into the future. It's almost like we're playing catch up with the technology in a way, and again, it's about trust. Back to that age-old question that once people trust the system and trust that the signature can't be manipulated and so on, and that it can't be misused, then they'll be happy to use it.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Yeah, and absolutely, I think it brings us back to that trust concept, but it also brings us back to, and it's part of what Eugene was talking about, that idea of the single identity. And again, I suppose because we are separate offices, departments, agencies, and we're all working very hard to develop our own thing, as it were, there is a tendency to develop things like user authentication, identification, separately within our silos. So I do think that the question that Michelle put to us is a really interesting one to bring forward in terms of whether we now need to look even beyond MyGov ID, which is a very important access route, but to stronger citizen authentication, with all the issues that will raise about cross-government data sharing and protection and so forth. But I think it's a really useful place maybe to wrap up the discussion on digital for all, because I think it just brings that concept that if we expect all of our citizens to engage with us digitally, that question of authentication, security, and, as Angela has reminded us several times, that overarching trust piece has to be absolutely central to how we deal with that. So listen, we are at 12 now. There's so much to talk about on this topic. We probably should budget for a longer time. And I think if we were in firmly now, we would be telling the caterers to push lunch back by a few minutes to keep that conversation going. In a digital world where we all have to retreat to our own kitchens, that's not going to happen. But I just want to wrap things up now, and I'd just like to first of all say a huge word of thanks to the panelists for all of their really interesting presentations this morning. I think the spectrum of the presentations has been fantastically informative, but also I think what they've all helped to do is to, again, to use that journey phrase, they've given us all perspectives that we can bring forward on that journey around such a vital range of issues, from sort of standards of accessibility, understanding the customer's perspective in terms of the nature and design of the service, going back to the Minister's comments as well about the application of universal design principles and how we use those. that concept of seeing it again through the customer's eyes and allowing them to, if you like, to view the whole of government services as a black box and have a similar look and feel and standards of access. And that's a really big challenge to us all. And it's not one we'll resolve this morning, but I think it's one to bring forward in this forum and also in the innovation network that Deeper supports. So a hell of a lot to bring forward from the conversations this morning, as well as giving us that really deep insight into the impressive range of innovations that are underway at the moment, kind of across the sector. And I suppose the big message that I would bring forward from it is to embrace all of those, the principles of universal access and universal design, and to guard very carefully against the risks of social exclusion that can flow from digital illiteracy and consequential digital exclusion. Just in wrapping things up then, I would like to just thank all of our QCN members from across and it's now over 130 organizations involved in the network. And so many who have tuned in to be with us today. Thanks for the really interesting questions. I'm sorry that we didn't have time to bring that conversation forward. There are questions there that we will bring into the QCSN action team and use it from the poll. And we had a really excellent response to the poll. Over 75% of participants have responded. There's way too much material in terms of the likely future events to begin to try and summarize it now, but rest assured we will be bringing that into the action team meetings, and Nora and Grace and the team will be picking up on that and using it to shape our activity across the coming year. I suppose it's important really also to remember that we're reflecting the end of a second extraordinarily difficult year in the delivery of public services. And there's nothing wrong with patting ourselves on the back. And I think when you listen to some of what we've heard this morning, we can all just take a moment to reflect on the fact that it's been difficult, it's been demanding, but we have delivered, and we can be very, very proud of the achievements in that time. And you look at some of the speakers that talked about the speed with which different types of services were delivered, redesigned, reconfigured, everything from wage subsidy schemes to remote courts being handled in that extraordinary space of time. I think we as public servants have done a lot that we can be enormously proud of, and that gives us a very firm platform for going forward to building the services of the future. Just to wrap it up, I want to say a special word of thanks to the Deeper team who put all of this work together. Owen, who's been managing all the logistics of the event and juggling slides and presentations and speakers. Nora, who's been frantically rejigging the agenda over the last few days. We lost one or two speakers and other people stepped in at short notice. And again, we're deeply grateful for that. Caroline, who's been so much involved in this network for a very long time and has supported the transition to Nora in terms of the management of it. And Grace, who's the backbone of the whole project and keeps things going from a deeper perspective. Again, none of this would happen without you, and we're very grateful. And we look forward to seeing you all at our next QCSN event, which will take place in the spring, and the team will be in touch with you about the details of that. And in the meantime, even though it's only the 8th of December, I'm going to take the opportunity to firstly thank you all for your participation and wish you all a very happy and peaceful and hopefully COVID-free Christmas. Take care. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.